Oh, hello, everyone. Happy Halloween. We don't know exactly which day Halloween is on, but it certainly is in this month, which is October
Isn't
2022.
it? Isn't it usually the last one?
I really have no idea. I mean,
I
for
mean,
me,
we
it's
already failed last episode. Last episode was uploaded on 29th of September, and we already acted like it was October. Like I face palmed when I saw that.
well, time flows differently for us. We are not subject to linear four-dimensional time.
We
What
used
can
the
I say?
Julian calendar. Everyone else was using the Gregorian one.
Old calendarists. Yes, very true. I don't know. So, like, probably our American viewers who number in the hundreds of millions will know this better. But Halloween is right around the corner or within this month. But even scarier than that is the good news that the CMTK Talk Hour is now an official shul podcast. There are many links you can follow us through in like through podcasts on Spotify and other venues. The links are in the video description, just below the links for TK's and my Patreon accounts. So after donating once more to our Patreon accounts, if you're donating, maybe it's trick or treat time. In bump up that $1 donation to two or maybe even three, and just it will be a kind payback for the time we are putting into these nice podcasts. And the thing with Halloween today is we are going to be talking about horror films. This is the CMTK Halloween horror movie, horror bash, scary blood gorgonzola special. So, so take it away, TK.
Yeah, the first question I wanted to ask is like, what do you consider a horror movie? For example, would you count like disaster movies by Roland Emmerich as horror? Because I mean, horrific shit does happen there, but there is like no monster or serial killer, but it's still kind of scary.
Hmm. But it's a very good question. I mean, like many other narrative forms, the boundaries of the horror movie are kind of hazy. I mean, I was thinking like, is Aliens a horror movie, for example, or is it a sci-fi movie? I mean, you could definitely say that the original Alien was a horror film. Also, it also frays on the other ends too, like some of the more modern films, like Annihilation with Natalie Portman. Was it sci-fi or horror, or like some of the new, more elevated horror they call it?
Yeah. You
Horror
know,
film.
yeah, it reminds me like Silence of the Lambs. It got an Oscar, if I remember correctly, but as a thriller,
Oh,
even though honestly, like Hannibal Lecter is just another movie monster.
well, when I was a kid, this was all the more clear. If there was Satan in it, or ghosts, or blood, then it was a horror film. If it was like somebody feeling anxious about something, then it was maybe a thriller. But I don't know. The boundaries are really kind of hazy now that you think about it. But
Yeah,
I mean,
like many like back in the day, it felt like horror movies were defined by something supernatural or extraordinary. Like usually it had to have a monster.
uh-huh. And also, like now in the modern day, on the inverse end, like would you consider the Saw series horror, or is it more like blood and gore and like kind of like a disgust orama kind of
I
film?
I generally understood like these like torture porn movies as like a subcategory of horror because it's generally not something you would like to happen to yourself.
No, and I mean, truth be told, this is my purely subjective personal view, but I really dislike those like gore focus movies. I don't know. I mean, it's like pulling the legs off an insect. And I mean, maybe like the original Human Centipede, they're okay, or like they're like quirky, funny concepts. But like, if you habitually watch those films, I don't know. I like, let's just say that me and you are not on the same page. You being the hypothetical gore horror fan. I would actually
I
like to
definitely am not.
Yeah, I'd like to take this time to relate a personal experience. Like I knew a person who was like all into these horror films, like blood, gore, but he was into like the bloodiest, goriest, like porniest films, like things like Srpski film and stuff like that. Now, this person, like as edgy as he was, had a form of arachnophobia so strong that if there was like one spider in the room, he would start taking his shirt off or something.
What sense does that make? Like, why would you take your shirt off if you're
I
scared?
I don't know. I think he was like instinctively scared of the spider getting under it and biting him. I don't know.
I mean, if I were a spider, I would see that as an invitation to suck his nipples.
Okay.
like,
I mean,
like free meal. Like if he shows, if he like that's animal language. If you present something vulnerable, it means you want to be bitten there.
well, I mean, do spiders even have that resolution? Or like, it's like a mountain to a person. So, like, I don't know. I don't know. But I think that person kind of deserved being assaulted by every spider, scorpion, vingaroon, and solpugit under the sun. I mean, it was not one of the best characters. I mean, it's not in my nature to slander anybody live on these shows, but like this was a special case. So, like, what is horror? What is horror to you? How would you define it?
Well, I know it's hard to define for me too. Because, like the general rule, I guess, is something scary. But then there's also movies like Ghostbusters that deal with potentially scary subject matter, but it's more presented as comedy.
Yeah, yeah.
Or I don't know, like
Little Shop of Horrors.
the classic Universal horror movies, you know, the black and white ones like Frankenstein, Dracula, and
Oh,
stuff.
oh.
Like those aren't really scary anymore today, I guess. But of course, they're still horror movies because of their classics.
Or maybe the Hammer House films with Peter
Uh,
Cushing
oh,
and
and
Christopher
Christopher Lee,
Lee.
yeah, those were classy.
I mean, right. So I think each generation has their own views of horror films. And I think this generation could count things like the back rooms. You know, if any of our listeners doesn't know, the back rooms are this like infinite shopping mall like dimension. And inside this dimension, there are like demonic entities. But the medium that's most popularly driving the back rooms narrative is some like really cool, really well made YouTube videos. They're
Yeah, I've
like,
seen those. That they're very good. Have you
and
seen the one? Have you seen the ones where like dinosaurs are stuck in the back rooms?
no, no, I only watch those made by this one YouTube user, Kane Pixels, I think is his name, and he's like the OG Backrooms creator. Like, like it's all done on like some sort of 3D program. I don't know, like 3D Max or I have no idea, but it's so dead realistic. The camera movements and the uncanniness, and like it's really a perfect fit with the medium. I mean, you watch it through a little screen, it's all like crinkly, and there's like moments where nothing happens, but you're scared. I'm scared when I'm
Yeah.
watching it.
You know
So,
what's scary? Like before the whole backrooms meme started, I did have nightmares that were literally like this. Where I
ooh,
was like walking through like completely blank alleyways, but like there
mm-hmm.
was just a dreadful atmosphere.
But did you encounter any entities?
Not that I remember.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I had this similar dream, but it was vertical, where I was kind of falling through an elevator shaft, but it was like very well lit and like it had wallpaper on and something, but you just kept falling and falling and falling. So there, maybe it was an idea that was gestating in our subconscious for a while. So there. And what about your other childhood experiences with horror films?
Yeah, I've been trying to think about like what could have been the earliest horror movie I ever watched. And I think the only distinctive memory I have is like one day I turned on the TV and on there was Alien versus Predator 2,
Oh,
which is probably the worst horror movie first horror movie to ever watch because first it's an awful movie. Second,
Mm-hmm.
it has like a scene where a pregnant woman gets xenomorphed, and
Oh no.
like the baby aliens feed through the mother's body and kill the fetus, and then like pop out of the pregnant belly. Like it's such an edgy scene.
I think I know what you mean. Yes. How old were you when you saw this
I don't
abomination?
remember. I think I was still in elementary school.
In my case, when I was growing up, it was the crossover between the 1980s and the 90s. So all the quote unquote classic horror films like Friday the 13th, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Exorcist. Oh my God. They were like all on at TV. And remember, when I was growing up, there was no internet. You could not watch things on demand. So there was a time of the night from 1 to 3 a.m. or maybe after. And it was reserved for the scariest films. I'm not talking like first, like between like, let's say 12 midnight or something, they would display maybe Nightmare on Elm Street, which was extremely scary. But then from like maybe at 2 a.m. or something, the motherfuckers on the TV station would put on Omen or The Exorcist. And because of this kind of stratification or this banding, in my mind, these a few films such as the original Exorcist and the Omen series and Rosemary's Baby, things like this, or like for some reason Child's Play, where this little doll comes
Ah,
alive
yeah,
and kills
Chucky.
people. So they were for me such toxic horror that I would think if I watched those films, I would be cursed for the rest of my life. Like I was so scared. I was not scared just of the films. I was scared of the concept of watching them because of the time. Like, I mean, I was a preppy kid, and being awake without reason at 3 a.m. for me was like I would feel like I would turn into something like the Russian sleep experiment, where I would be left without sleep and would never be able to sleep again and die because of sleep deprivation. But when it hit me really awfully. Like, I remember I was like 13 or something. And my brother, my father, and I, we went to see, there was a shopping mall next to our house, and they had a multiplex, everything. And father and sons, which movie did we go to see?
Uh-oh.
Event Horizon.
Oh,
Oh, this movie, this movie broke me, and I believe like
it
because
made
of
you a
Event
Warhammer
Horizon,
40K fan forever.
yeah,
That's how
that
it broke
happened.
you.
No, it's really scary. I mean, and for some reason, I I cannot prove this to people, but we saw an uncut version of the film. And remember, in those days, nobody cared about age regulations. We were just allowed. My father was with us, so we went and saw the goddamn thing. And the uncut version of the film, at the end, for those who don't know, the spaceship disappears, then reappears. Turns out it's been to hell, and then there's this kind of hellish revelation at the end.
Yeah.
And and at the end, you see things like a father killing his son, this amputated people murdering each other, like lots of blood, gore, people gouging their own eyes out, and the sounds, they're so loud. Oof. And I kid you not, for 1 week, I was not able to sleep. And I think because of this, until my early 30s, I did not watch horror films, not even in a kind of like, not even light films I would touch, like films, a few films like those we are about to discuss now. I was like, you know what? I'm not even going there. I've had enough of this horror shit. And that movie scarred me for life. Do you have a film
Yeah,
like that?
like you just remind me. Well, first two things. What you're saying is really interesting because, as far as I'm aware, like the uncut version of Event Horizon is today considered lost.
Hmm.
Like they destroyed that footage at some point because it was cut out and they didn't care about it.
Okay, let me
That
at
if you
least.
have actually watched it, that is actually of historic importance.
Well, I do remember this one scene. The father saw his son's body covered with maggots. And I don't know which version it was, but I mean, this image
Mm.
really, really stayed with me for so long. I don't know how uncut it was, but I mean, I remember the kid's dead body covered with maggots. That never goes away. I mean,
Mm.
I've been scarred for life. Maybe they were test releasing it on a Turkish audience because it's it's the
That
it's the
would be
third world.
so cruel. Like, oh, the Turks, they can endure it.
They dump all the toxic stuff there.
Revenge for Gallipoli.
I think it's a kind of cinematic version of this neat scheme Britain has going with Turkey, where they export all their quote unquote recyclable trash. And lo and behold, it turns up in a Turkish landfill outside Adana or somewhere.
Wait, was it not an American movie?
Oh, I think it was a British. The
Was
money
it?
was
Oh,
British. I
yeah.
don't know.
I only know that Sam Neill is from New Zealand.
I believe it was a either British American or British
Let me look
Canadian.
it up. Let me look it up quickly.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, dear viewers, what was the horror movie that broke you? This is a support group. It is the Halloween super special movie, Gorgonzola special. So don't feel shy. Just share. Sharing is caring. And another way to care is through Patreon donations.
Well, it was produced by Paramount Pictures, which is an American company.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and the director is Paul W. S. Anderson, who is, I think, British.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's the
Well,
thing with movies. It's such like a group project that you can't really like attest it to like one author or one country, especially nowadays.
ay, 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 ay.
Yeah.
So,
Anyway, the
what?
second thing I wanted to say, like I had the same experience as you, but you will never guess with which movie.
Well, was it Emmanuel?
No, I don't know about that movie,
Okay.
but it starts with an E.
Oh, E. Okay, let me take a wild, wild guess. Existence from David Cronenberg?
No, look,
Okay.
I had as a kid, we still had VHS,
Mm-hmm.
and I bought at the market like a new VHS for The Land Before Time, like one of the sequels to that movie.
Yeah, yeah.
And back in the day, on those VHS tapes, they would also roll like advertisements,
Mm-hmm.
advertisements for movies that were also around the time available and stuff.
Yep.
So I watched one of those advertisements, and because it's a dinosaur cartoon, I thought it's also gonna be about dinosaurs. And then it's like this scene, it's like dark, there's tall grass, there's a shed. A kid goes into the shed, there's a strong light, and then you see him, E.T.
Oh,
E.T. the
so
extraterrestrial. Like that trailer scared me because the first scene they show me it's like where he screams at the little girl and extends his neck. And that already traumatized me. And then I told my mother about this because she saw me crying. And then she said, oh, come on, it's E.T. He's cute and stuff. And then she showed me the movie and it was worse because there's like this scene where E.T. is like lying in a river, half dead and gray, and he does like,
that was really, really like
yeah,
intense.
like that movie gave me an intense fear of aliens. It's funny that I didn't talk about this in the episode where we talked about alien encounters, but legit, for many years as a kid, one of my biggest fears was being abducted by gray aliens. Because the gray alien, the face is like perfectly designed to be in the uncanny valley. And when you're a little impressionable child, like look, even just seeing a face of a gray on like online or something, like it brought tears to my eyes. Like it unlocked some very deep psychological fear inside me.
No, I mean,
So I went
I had
many. Sorry.
no, I had similar experiences to you on both accounts. I mean, first, I also had a pervasive phobia of gray aliens. And for a long time, I thought about why this could be. And at the end, I decided that maybe it's an infant's first childhood memories of the giant parent's face staring at him or her.
I think there is some legit work that tried to analyze that, and they found a similar result.
But going back to our good friend E.T., that movie was also traumatic. I mean, the way it displayed death, and it took me two viewings to realize that, when the government agents come into Elliot's house, with
Oh
those
yeah.
astronaut suits. That scene was awfully scary, and it took me two viewings. Maybe I'm just dumb, but it took me two viewings to realize that those astronauts were not evil aliens, but I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, it's deliberately shot to be ironic that like the alien is like the good guy and the humans act like they're the extraterrestrial beings.
And also, it's like, I mean, most parents would be like, it's E.T., the friendly alien. And then the friendly alien kind of gives the kids a mind fuck by revealing in the most poignant way the fragility of life and the inevitability of death. And it's kind of like, I mean, it was very scary for me too. I wasn't scared of E.T. itself, but those astronaut dudes. And I remember when E.T. was all like pale
Yeah,
and dying, that was like, no, it's not a memory I would want to live again.
yeah. Like the fun fact about E.T., it was originally going to be a horror movie. Like
Oh,
like
was it?
Poltergeist, which is the another Spielberg movie. Originally,
I love that one.
yeah, E.T. and Poltergeist were originally supposed to be the same movie about like a
Mhm.
family that like it was supposed to be, I think, roughly based on the Hopkinsville encounter, which was like a real life alien encounter where a farmer family was like harassed by little goblin aliens, which were probably
Yeah, with
some
the
owls, and alcohol was involved. But yeah, it was.
yeah, I mean,
But yeah, Poltergeist was originally supposed to be about such a farmer family being terrorized by aliens trying to invade their farm. And like
ah,
midway through the movie, like one of the aliens would like switch sides and become friends with the kids of the family. And then they decided that this movie is too schizophrenic. We have to like split it up into two different ones. But that's kind of why there's still some horror elements left in ET.
well, speaking about horror films, now that you mentioned Poltergeist, the two films, they're really great films. And the first Poltergeist, the way they build up the world, the rules of the afterlife and stuff, it's like really like legit, and it leaves your noggin jogging, it leaves you thinking. And in the second film is kind of like not as great, let us say. There's some like very stereotypical Indian magic involved.
Yeah.
But there's a final beast, and that was designed by H.R. Giger, the same guy who designed the Alien.
Oh, what, really?
Yeah, yeah. So in Poltergeist 2, let me just
I
rephrase
haven't
it
watched
for
the movie. I don't know. Let me look that up.
let me also rephrase it for our viewers. So there's a satanic vomit in one of the kids, or one of the characters. He vomits. The vomit becomes a kind of snake-like Giger creature, and then turns into a Giger, HR Giger-esque biomechanoid man without arms or legs that just crawls about like a lizard. And then finally it morphs into this really satanic abomination, something like Joe Carpenter's The Thing.
Is it this?
Yes, yes. So
Oh.
it's a guy. They dressed the guy up in a latex suit, but they chose an actor who was quadriplegic, so he did not have any arms or legs. So you see this guy riding about on the floor. The movie, it's kind of like Poltergeist 2. It's kind of forgettable, but those special effect sequences, they were like quite something. I mean,
Yeah, I'm looking at the GIF right now. It looks very interesting.
I would heartily recommend Poltergeist 1 and 2. You should watch them over the course of a weekend. But like all horror movies, actually, this could be a salient characteristics of horror films. A horror film is a film you do not watch alone. I think this is the basal, most crucial defining characteristic of a horror film.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, it's kind like the cliches that it's a movie you watch with your crush so you can like protect her.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think it's no coincidence that only in the happy years of matrimony that I have began to pick up on my, let us say, horror movie expertise, especially during COVID, the last year of COVID, and like most of this year, actually. My wife and I, we watched a lot of horror films, like none of the really gory ones, but there are a couple of movies we will not touch. One of them is the Omen series. Another one is The Exorcist. Also, Jacob's fucking Leather. It's like some sort of schizophrenic satanic film. And I don't know, a few things like that. I don't know. Do you have any no-go horror films that you would never watch even if they paid you for it?
Uh, I think like Hostel, I would never want to watch because just based off the description, it's like one of those gore movies, you know?
Mm. Actually, the first Hostel, I went to see it in the cinemas,
Uh,
and it was more like a kind of Blair Witch meets the Saw kind of thing. It wasn't extremely gory. I mean, the first Saw movie wasn't also that bad, to be honest. The whole thing with the Hostel is, I think, an American's latent fear of Europe, basically, which was, I think, if you watch it now, it might even strike us as like quasi-racist or just weird, because they go to a weird place and everybody's weird, and turns out they kill people there, but come on,
yeah. In general,
it's just
yeah,
Europe.
this general fear Americans had of like ex-Soviet countries.
Yeah, and also that's rich from the world's number one producer of mass murderers and school shootings and overall dangerous human beings. But anyways, let us not exceed our boundaries.
Yeah.
So actually tonight we had a plan of like each one of us picks three horror franchises or movies to talk about and like just discuss. But maybe we could kind of stretch that plan a bit. But I would just, throw the ball to you. Like, what is one horror film that you like and would like to elaborate further?
Well, like just this week, I watched Midnight Mass with my girlfriend, and I thought it was pretty good.
So what
It's
happens?
it's
What
not a
happens
movie;
there?
it's a mini series on Netflix. And
Mm.
well, I'm trying to think of how I could tell the plot without spoiling anyone. Would you
Should
mind if I spoil you? Because
No,
then
no.
I could
I
just
think we should definitely go full DEFCON 3 on this and just
yeah.
spoil everything
So
because
like yeah, to our viewers, like if you still want to watch Midnight Mass, skip like 10 minutes ahead.
yeah, yeah.
So it's about this small New England island called Crockett, and everyone on the island is very religious. They're all
Mm-hmm.
Catholic. They all go to church every Sunday.
Yep.
And like the old priest of the church,
Mm-hmm.
like he goes on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land in Israel, and like
Anna.
generally the Middle East. And on the
Yes.
road to Damascus, he
Mm-hmm.
comes like there's a sandstorm, and he goes into a cave to protect himself. And in the cave, he's attacked by this creature that looks straight up like Nosferatu. Like it's never like clearly stated what it is, but it's strongly implied to be a vampire because it looks like Nosferatu, and there's like two wings on its back, like that wing.
Anna.
And yeah, the old man, like he gets attacked by this creature, and as it sucks him dry, it also sucks him dry for like all fear of death, and also makes him younger. Like he like gets sucked dry, and then he suddenly looks like he's 30 again. And based
And
on
then
that, he assumes that this was not a demon or something, but it was actually an angel, and this is like a sign from God.
Anna.
And so what
Nice.
he does is like he goes back to his little island in New England and acts like he is like a new priest that was sent because nobody would recognize him again. And he
Mm-hmm.
secretly like smuggles the angel in quotation marks with him. And then using the power of the blood of this creature, he heals a woman who was paralyzed from the waist down, and makes various other miracles to like, and he genuinely believes he's doing good work because he genuinely believes this is an angel.
I
And
mean,
like everyone thinks also he's like a miracle worker, and he like reinforces their religious beliefs and such.
motherfucker discovered stem cells just
Basically,
just
kind
there.
of, yeah. And
So Doesn't sound like a bad course of events, but I guess somewhere
Just
along
wait,
the
just wait.
nah.
Yeah, basically, at some point, like the curse, like he also becomes a vampire,
Hmm.
and he kills someone and drinks his blood and feels no remorse about it, which about he and like he
Ah,
and he also like burns in sunlight, like so it becomes very obvious that he has become a vampire, but he's still in denial about it and like uses like verses from the Bible to justify this because I mean that's the thing about vampire lore, that it's kind of meant to be a perversion of Christian practices, like symbolically
hmm.
drinking the blood of Jesus, so you have like an eternal life after death.
Yep,
And
yep.
vampires drinking the blood of humans to remain undead.
Well, I think like what interests me the most about this series is the creature, and I mean it's kind of nice that they were bold enough to do something like this because like we feel probably erroneously, but we feel that in our day and age, movies have kind of lost their creative edge. But I mean, like from what you describe now, we might even like go and start watching this right away. It
Yeah,
sounds like a really original
it is
original
it is
series.
very original because like the monster, like the vampire is not really the real monster. It's more like this, like it's all about this symbolic corruption of religious institutions because like a vampire is something that
Ah,
is antithetical to Christian belief. It's like meant to be a perversion of it. But that because everyone wants to believe that these are like genuine wonders or that this is a genuine angel, they they use Bible verses to like justify everything that is happening and try to rationalize everything that is happening as good, and
ah.
like that God wants all this to happen. And like the scariest character in the whole series is not even a vampire, but this like Karen type woman who helps
Uh-huh.
out the priest. Even when he's like doubting himself, like she thinks, no, this is all a sign from God, and so, and like she's such a racist Karen. You will love to hate her. and
Well,
and she's
really,
the scariest character because there are literally people like this in real life who literally do the shittiest, most inhuman, least Christian behavior imaginable and still think they are like within God's grace.
I mean, tell me about it. Especially like when one enters work life, you see what vampirism really means. And
Mm.
well, I mean, this is extremely interesting. When you describe the isolated island setting, it kind of reminded me of one of the films I wanted to talk about, the Wicker Man, the original Wicker Man, which was made in 1973. It's this really kind of subversive folk horror film, which, if you watch it today, it's like really innocent. And there's something really naive about it, too. So the plot goes there's a murder in one of the northernmost islands of the United Kingdom. So this policeman comes with this really cool looking seaplane and goes to investigate. Turns out everyone living on this island are kind of these like semi-Nordic, semi-Greek pagan worshippers, and they have all these weird folklore and traditions. And one of the best things about the film is that, like for at least the first half of the film, nothing scary is going on. In fact, like you see all the weird ways of this folk. Like the guy goes into a baker, and there's like weird cakes shaped like babies there, but they look also like Egyptian coffins. And then like a little boy is sick, so his mother puts a frog in his mouth and then takes the frog out, and then he goes to a local pub, and then everybody is singing about like basically really raucous sexy songs, but it's kind of like an island free of the dogmatic aspects of Christianity. Like people, like there's a village school and they learn about how to make babies basically, and they have this maypole dances and stuff. So it's kind of like you have to watch, by the way, the special edition, the director's cut, which has a lot of these world building scenes attached. Like this policeman is kind of like a prudish person, but that's a nice thing about the film is that the policeman is not like a caricature of the man, like he's not like a straw character. Like he's religious and he's somewhat conservative, but he comes from an understandable place. So he goes out one night, he sees this snails on a tombstone, and suddenly in the graveyard he sees all these like couples having sex. But the way it's filmed, you know, it's not aestheticized. People have like their buttocks out in the moonlight and stuff like that. It's kind of ridiculous, and obviously, like a lot of love making is actually funny and ridiculous and just quirky. So that whole setting puts you in a mood. Then in the second half of the film, it's turned out that the missing person, the policeman, has been summoned to search, is actually a ruse, and the islanders want to have this human sacrifice, basically, and the policeman is the chosen human sacrifice. So he's put inside the titular wicker man and burned alive. But before he dies, this character delivers this kind of what I believe the best represented scene depicting just the strength of faith in cinematic history. It's not exaggerated, it's not over the top, but he's just saying you're wrong. Like God will save me, and like he starts praying. But like you see the actor also is like motivated from a place of belief. So at the end, the sacrifice scene, there's a kind of big dialogue between Lord Summerisle, who's the lord of this pagan island, played by Christopher Lee, and this policeman. It's just like it's exactly a kind of debate you probably may have heard in the first centuries of Christianity in the Roman Empire. It's just a beautiful, beautiful, very well made, very colorful, beautiful film. Very, very strongly recommended.
Yeah, it kind of sounds similar to Midsummer.
Yeah, I think Midsummer was a kind of Whole Foods kind of remake of this whole thing.
Yeah, right. By the way, I have a very, very funny story about Midsummer.
Go.
Like in Midsummer, they have this like tradition where once an elder reaches 72, they push him off a cliff to die. Recently, I rewatched with my girlfriend this children's TV show, Dinosaurs. The one with the puppets that was made by the Jim Henson Company.
Yeah.
And in one episode, mind you, show is from the 90s. In one episode, the dinosaurs also have a tradition that as soon as a dinosaur reaches the age of 72, he's pushed off a cliff into the tar pits. And we are watching this, and my girlfriend is like, wait, honey, isn't that like in Midsummer? And I'm like, yeah, like even the same age. That's the funny coincidence.
Well, there's a similar theme in The Wicker Man as well. Basically, the reason they are sacrificing this guy is that this island is a kind of farming island, so their crops failed. So they have to have a sacrifice of an authority figure. And actually, the plot goes that the policeman even says this, like, if it fails again, next time they're going to sacrifice you, Lord Summerisle. And apparently that's their thing. So if things get rough, they sacrifice the king. And I think these all kind of go back to this. There's this kind of great big research by this British guy. It's called The Golden Bough. Let me just Google it because I want to tell everyone the author. Just 1 second, please. Okay, it's called The Golden Bough, A Study in Magic and Religion by Sir James George Frazier. And it's this enormous book. Basically, it's the kind of like heyday of the British Empire. This researcher goes through almost everything available to him from historic pagan beliefs. And he also compares like beliefs in Aboriginal cultures all around the world. And basically what he gets, the gist of the matter is that apparently from the primeval ages onwards, people had this tradition to sacrifice the king. So the whole theme of the king being sacrificed to appease the unpredictable forces of nature, I mean, he argues that was kind of baked into the entire foundation of human society. Maybe that's a That's a big stretch. But this work is like a really good compendium of unusual folk beliefs, and
I
it
mean,
was really popular
it
back in the
also
day.
makes low-key sense from a political point of view, because it would motivate the king to do as best as he could. Because if he fucks up, he will get killed.
Yeah, I mean that's accountability there for you. So I think that whole thing, I mean, you can definitely see the Golden Bough influence in The Wicker Man, and probably it's there in Midsummer as well.
Yeah, but not in
And I guess
Dinosaurs.
this whole Dinosaurs show, well, no, actually, it was very well written. The last episode of that show is
Oh yeah.
basically a kind of really poignant, like they all go resigned to extinction. It's like really adult, grown up stuff.
Yeah,
So,
the
so
last
I'm
episode is
sure
what.
some very smart
Yeah,
people.
but wait a minute. Like the last episode is what everyone talks about, but literally the whole show was kind of like that. Like for example, there is this one episode where like the boy of the family discovers like a new energy
Mhm.
source. Like he basically discovers geothermal heating,
Mhm.
and like and and then like this big company that owns everything on Pangea just tries to sabotage his idea as much as possible until they finally just buy the idea. Or no, wait, they want to buy the idea, but he refuses because he knows they won't do anything with it. So what they do instead is they buy the volcano that they wanted to use, and
Ah,
then they just block that off for 10,000 years. And when you look at the modern world, there's very similar business practices going on.
oh, yeah. I mean, Nestle, Unilever, some car
Yeah.
companies, some petroleum
Yeah.
companies.
You know, and I just remembered something else. There was like a double episode called Nuts to War, where the two-legged dinosaurs go to war with the
Mhm.
four-legged dinosaurs for like some political bullshit. I think like the official reasons they give is that there is a dispute over pistachio production. And now,
That,
you know what the insane thing is? In 2020, the
mhm.
pistachio lobby of California urged Donald Trump to declare war on Iran because Iranian pistachios were outdoing Californian ones on the global market.
Oh my
So
God.
reality almost mimicked this show.
I mean, I think it was Eric Hobsbawm who said that you must never underestimate the magical ability of artists to predict nature in the most unpredictable ways.
Yeah.
So you look at like the most unrelated TV shows, and they rhyme so shockingly with reality. It's really strange. So let's have another film for you then from you then, my friend.
Yeah. Well, I didn't really have much of a list in preparation. Like, I mean, I just wanted to talk a bit maybe about like the classic monsters, you know, like Dracula, Frankenstein's monster,
Mm-hmm.
the mummy.
Yeah, yeah,
Wait, I had an excellent question for you. Like,
yeah,
so imagine it's like late at night, you want to go home quickly, so you take a detour through a cemetery. But
yeah.
this upsets the dead so much that like a spirit comes to you and says you now have to live as an undead. But because it is merciful, it lets you choose what type of undead you want to be. So I'm asking you, would you
Ah,
like what type of undead would you like to be? Would you like to be a vampire, a mummy, a zombie, a spooky, scary skeleton?
well, I think if forced, like how exotic can we go? I would like to be
Anything.
turned. I would like to be turned into this Indonesian slash Malaysian slash Filipino monster called a Manananggal or a Penanggalan, which is basically a floating head trailing the guts. I think that's my ideal form. Just float around like that, terrorize people, and then when morning comes, reattach to my body and continue my daily routine. But if I had to choose like a classic like horror monster, I'd probably have to be. I'd probably have to choose the vampire because
Really? I know I feel like that vampires are extremely restrictive. You cannot go out into sunlight. You cannot enter someone's home unless they invite you, which to be honest is the polite
that's
way to
just
do it.
American. That's just American vampires, man. Do
Oh,
European
that's like
vampires ever do that?
that's classic vampire lore. They can't enter a house unless they're invited.
Yeah, and also you have to like find and brutally kill people, so it's kind of a drag. So maybe I'll change the
Yeah.
vampire.
Although on the other hand, you can also transform into a bat.
Yeah, and just eat moths and I guess maybe subsist that way. Which kind of bat though? There's like
Probably vampire bat. No, imagine becoming like a vampire that turns into a fruit bat, like those like
yeah, yeah,
Amazonian ones. That would be cool.
yeah. I think that could be a vegan vampire. But no, I chose vampires because all the others also seem restrictive. Like mummy, like what the hell would I do wrapped with linen all the time, Or if I chose like a zombie, that's just boring. I mean, I guess you don't get to think straight.
I
At
mean,
least,
to be like the mummy from the Brendan Fraser movie would be kind of cool. Like
oh, Imhotep.
yeah, Imhotep, exactly. Like you have like these old ass ancient superpowers. You walk around in bandages and like wear like a golden mask to hide the fact that you're dead. Like that's that's option B for me. Option A for me would be just a spooky, scary skeleton because come on, it would be so fun to just walk around as a skeleton and like detach like parts of your body and play around with it. Like I detach my own head, present it to some like onlooker, like hello. Like
Ah, that's true. I mean, okay, so it's a tough choice between a Penangalan and a regular skeleton for me too. I think, yeah, because skeletons are like
yeah.
smart on their feet. They have no mobility problems.
Yeah. I generally
I
also
guess you.
just love this skeleton aesthetic, like this Baroque aesthetic of like remembering
Mhm.
death, but also having some fun with it.
Yeah, it's too bad that skeletons are not very charismatic in movies. I mean, like, like they're kind of like the minion monsters. You always have a dozen of them or
Yeah.
something. By the way, that whole Ray Harryhausen animation with I think Jason and the Argonauts and the Skeleton Warriors, that movie is so fantastic. I mean,
Oh,
even
definitely.
today, the animation really stands up. Stop
Yeah.
motion,
Harryhausen was a legend.
yeah. We should do another podcast on just Harryhausen films and Harryhausen monsters.
Yeah. Or like classic stop motion movies in general, like
Oof,
The
oof.
Lost World and King Kong.
I mean, I'm gonna go out on a side limb here, but you know, I think it was the Valley of Gwangi where Harryhausen animates this Allosaurus.
Yes.
And it's a very old fashioned, cold blooded, tail dragging theropod. Okay. But the way the Allosaurus kind of does the snake wriggle with its tail as it's fighting, and you can see that the animal is stressed. So it's kind of like twisting its tail around on the ground as it moves about. I we now know the new image of dinosaurs. It's more modern. The tails are not touching the ground mostly, but it really feels bad that this was not the case.
I
So
mean, I guess they probably could still, at least some theropods could probably still like wiggle the tail tip around like that.
I
Similar,
think Ceratosaurus apparently had this kind of loose tail, which
yeah.
was
Like there is this
kind.
big division inside Theropoda where like earlier theropods had like thicker
Mm-hmm,
tails, more similar to what is seen in like crocodiles. And then you have this
mm-hmm.
whole family called Tetanura, which the name means stiff tails. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
Tetanura are those again with the stiffer tails, and they also have only 3 fingers anymore on their hand. And to our
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
listeners who don't know, like part of Tetanura were the Allosaurs, the Megalosaurs, the Coelurosaurs, and all of their descendants, the birds, are also part of that group.
Unfortunately, it does not have the coolest theropods. The Ceratosaurus with the
Yeah.
3 horns, the
That was in
saber
another
teeth.
movie though. In like what was it called? 1 million BC. This movie with what is his name? Charleston Heston,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
the guy who was also in Planet of the Apes. Charlton Heston. How do you pronounce his name?
yeah, yeah. I know it from a Jim Carrey parody song. It says Charlton Heston movies are no longer in demand.
Yeah,
Na,
Charlton
na, na.
Heston.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's like a big side alley for you. But
Would you count King Kong as horror?
if maybe if it represents the primal horror of the wild, but I don't know. No,
I
I
mean,
think it's like even from the first King Kong, it was a kind of like spectacle film and
yeah. I mean,
damsel in
there is one
distress.
scene in the original King Kong that was so scary they had to cut it out, and it is lost today. And
Which
they actually,
what happened there?
it's basically, you know, in the 2005 one where they fall into like this big valley and it's just full of these giant insects and maggots.
Oh yes,
That,
that's my
that's actually a
favorite scene.
remake of the missing scene.
Ah, so they had all sorts of animated bugs there, or something like that.
Exactly. Like, actually Peter Jackson and his team remade that scene with the technology that was available at the time. You can watch it on YouTube. It's very well made. And yeah, I think like there's like there's giant insects, but there is also like a cave octopus and a lizard.
Oh, well, I mean, I did not know about this, but I mean, even the 2005 King Kong scene with Peter Jackson, I think it's like one of the best. Like, if you're a creature enthusiast, that's like one of your formative scenes there for you.
Yeah,
All
that
those.
I hated that scene and I loved it because that is just horrific. Like the worst scene is like the one where one guy like tries to climb up the walls and then just this giant claw comes out of the wall and drags him back into the hole.
Speaking about horror films, we recently watched the same scene in like the least likely film. So, what was his name? Big Trouble in Little China, directed
Oh,
by John Carpenter. Yes,
yeah.
my wife chimed in to help. So in that scene, it's a hallucinogenic film. Basically, these two guys get lost in Chinatown, and then it's every stereotype about Chinese people taking to such a maximum level that it kind of turns into some sort of like bizarre Nintendo Entertainment System like game with there's like a Chinese Bigfoot with a bird-like beak, and then they go to this underground city. There's this like whole wild adventure.
Yeah, I loved that
But
movie. Like, I remember how like excited my father was when he showed it to me for the first time.
you remember then this King Kong scene I'm talking to you about, right? Like they're like
The monkey, yeah.
crawling around in these tunnels, and then from this wall,
Ah,
this
yeah.
giant spider or a giant cricket comes out and eats one of the guys
Yeah, in the
randomly.
I think like the bowels of the earth is what they call that place.
Yeah, and you know there's no CG in that film, so they actually had to make this like 10-meter long cricket insect monster. Back in those days, like with CG, like you could have monsters come out of every hole and go back in there. But for this film, for just like this one scene, which takes like 10 seconds, they made this entire huge monster, which doesn't appear in any other scene afterwards and has no other point in the movie. But that was just a wild ride. Big Trouble in Little China. So, so,
That's the
so
best
let's.
scene. What's the best scene from that movie? I think it's the one where like the old guy does like this thumb magic, and it's basically like playing a video game. Like he summons some spirit and controls it with his thumb as if it were a video game. That
The city in it. Kim Cartrell, I believe, was her name. So, and then Kurt Russell is in it, and he's like this don't give a shit about anything kind of trucker going from adventure to adventure. And they really made a point of having this truck in many scenes. I think it was kind of their plan to launch an Indiana Jones style franchise with this kind of like anti-hero and gung ho action.
Mm.
And if this film had succeeded, maybe the next adventure would be maybe him going to fight the Bigfoot or discover the ruins of Atlantis with his truck or something. I don't know.
I think
We were
yeah,
denied. We were denied such a glorious franchise.
I think it was like not as successful at the time because many people took it too seriously when really this movie was meant to be mostly a parody of like kung fu movies and like these Asia mysticist movies.
Do you think that Big Trouble and Little China is set in the same universe as 1994 Mortal Kombat?
Yeah, I think the makers of the game directly said that this one character is taken from these like wind gods from Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah, yeah. But in your experience, I'm not well versed on Chinese mythology, but are there such gods in Chinese religion?
Um, I mean, I'm also not an expert on this. What I do know, like the ancient Chinese, I mean, I think they still have that today, have this concept of the mandate of heaven, which means that if a current emperor is doing well and everything is going well under his reign, that means like the heavens are like in favor of him. And when like natural catastrophes happen or like there is a financial crash, it means the heavens have grown sick of this ruler and probably his dynasty, and so it needs to be replaced. And what is interesting is I think it's like, well, today this is like a very like metaphysical concept, the mandate of heavens, but it probably originated with like a sky god similar to Tengri from Tengriism, which is the old folk religion of the Mongolian and Turkic people.
Yes, yes. Well, I mean, if you go that deep about it, the Orhun monuments,
the
the
runes.
first monuments ascribed to Turkic people. I mean, so it is dated to basically, I mean, especially if you're a Turkish person, they feel like thousands of years old, but they're actually almost contemporaneous with Islamic expansion into Central Asia. So one hypothesis goes, I'm not even saying theory, but one hypothesis goes is that basically Turks were kind of caught between Chinese religion and the incipient Islamic expansion. And in order to kind of stake out their own identity, they basically enlisted the help of Chinese artisans to construct this monument for them. And lo and behold, the national identity was at least recorded for the first time that we know of. So
yeah, it doesn't seem likely, honestly.
I don't know. It only took us 4 degrees of separation for us to get to this point from Big Trouble in Little China and King Kong. But that's what I love about these podcasts.
Like ancient Turkic people, although of course we have to be careful what we count as Turkic people, because there's of course like big controversy, like were, for example, Attila and his Huns Turkic people or not, and like various other people like the Hephthalites. But they're generally, do you know the Persian Book of Kings? The Shahnameh,
no.
I think it's called.
Shahnameh, I know, but I don't know what's written in it.
Yeah, it's like a collection of like, it's basically, it's the Book of Kings. So it's like the story of like the first kings from like the like primordial times until the last one that was conquered by the Arab invaders. And there, like the relationship between the Persians and the Turks is already a very defining conflict. Because Turkic people were already around in the Central Asian steppes around late antiquity and fighting the Persian Empire at the time.
I mean, I know that towards the late Byzantine years, a lot of the quote unquote Byzantine generals were actually probably people of Seljuk descent. But I mean, it's just like today where they move to America and take up American sounding names. So at least some of the late era Byzantine generals were probably Seljuks or Pechenegs with Greek names, or who had recently converted to Orthodoxy. I mean,
yeah, but maybe we could have a different time period, late Byzantine. We're talking about like late antiquity when Western Rome was mostly still standing,
Okay. So that I don't know much about.
Yeah, like
But
before the Islamic expansion, that's what I want to say. Like there was already a Turkic a presence in Central Asia and probably all the way into Eastern Europe if you count various steppe peoples like the Huns, for example, as
yeah,
Turkic
yeah.
people. Although, of course, like I said, that is controversial, and we have to be careful with claims like that because you don't actually have a good idea of what language the Huns spoke.
They're really they're a real mystery, aren't they? I mean, I read about how they practiced head binding, so their heads were like almost conically shaped,
Yeah.
and I think this is supported by archaeological evidence
Yeah.
too. At
I
least some
mean,
Huns, maybe their
but many
commanders or
people
something.
did that. Like in Peru, you always find these old Inca heads, which also had like this cranial deformation, and then you have these shitty YouTube channels who say these are like alien skulls.
Well, no, actually, it's obvious that they were Turkic generals who conquered so hard that they crossed the Bering Strait all the way down to North from North America, somehow crossed the Darien Gap, and they were there.
There is
This is
like
a joke, by the way.
remember reading like there is a very interesting study which like the ancestors of the Native Americans before they it's a genetic study which found that
Hmm.
before they crossed the Bering Strait, the ancestors of the Native Americans may have originated somewhere around the Altai region.
Yeah,
Is of course where some linguists say that like the language groups of the Turks, the Mongolians, the Tungusic people also originated. But those two events are like
I,
thousands of years behind, separated from each other. So it's probably
I
not
mean,
that big of a connection.
there is some there are some unexplicable connections there actually. Like make of this what you will, but certain Anasazi or Navajo basket patterns are like one on one the same as those you see in Eastern Anatolia. Now, maybe it's a technical thing, like if you're like weaving together with coarse bands, maybe it's easier to do these certain rhomboid shapes or whatever, but they're extremely similar. So maybe there's a cultural connection,
Yeah,
maybe not a direct genetic or a national one,
yeah.
but I mean, it is possible because cultural artifacts get transmitted across cultures and quote unquote races, whatever that means. But uh, I mean, we should definitely do a pan Turkic giga podcast one day because our audience may not be aware, but actually both of us have some sort of Turkish descent. So,
Well,
there, you know,
full on Turkish descent, at least with me. Like I live in Switzerland, but my whole family is Turkish.
I live in Turkey. I have some Mediterranean and Sephardic mix in my background, but I consider myself a secular Turkish citizen too.
Mm.
So it was fated, my friend. I think we are going to completely convert this channel into a pan-Turkish channel. If we did that, by the way, we would get hundreds of thousands of views. People are crazy about that in Turkey,
Yeah, like
especially the
my father, all literally like most of the YouTube he watches are like Turkish history videos. He loves that
es-
shit too.
especially these days. I believe people are looking for, let us say, a deeper version of their national identities because I mean maybe it's a kind of backlash against migration from Arabic countries, so people want to identify as more deeply Turkish than they did maybe a decade ago or 2 decades ago. So that's like, I mean, big business there, but I don't know. Do you speak Turkish, by the way?
Biraz.
Vay kardeş, ben bayağı konuşuyorum tabii. Ama anyways.
I'm
We start.
I'm better at understanding it than speaking it.
And what do you make of the bizarre similarities between Turkish and Japanese? The words kara,
Oh yeah, that's
su,
I told you like
chai.
Yeah, I told you I have a friend who is a linguist, and I think she also wrote like a little paper on that, for, like a seminary paper, and like that was once a popular idea that like Japanese, Korean, the Turkic languages, Mongolian, and the Tungusic languages form like one big language family, similar to how
Hmm.
Indo-European is one big language family. But I
Yeah.
think today the idea is more that all these languages had separate origins, but because these people
Hmm.
lived so long next to each other, they formed what is called a Sprachbund. So they just borrowed elements from each other without actually descending from the same language.
I mean, I ain't no linguist, but if you watch a Japanese anime dubbed in Turkish, it's a perfect fit. If you watch it dubbed in English, it's kind of wonky and like, but the languages are constructed the same way, the way the words are conjugated. So I don't know. It seems to me that there was like in Central Asia, this is my entirely personal view on this, by the way. Basically, the ancestors of Turks were like basically Sardukar in the Dune universe. They were very highly skilled militarily and they were extremely skilled administrators. So with maybe as little as maybe 100, 200 families, they could like at least control or manage great territories or sub civilizations, let us say. I mean, you have Turkic dynasties in what is now Pakistan, what is now Iran, Turkey itself, of course. So I think that kind of left a cultural legacy, if nothing else,
Yeah,
in a in an extremely wide part of the world.
yeah.
I
That's
would not think like sorry, I would
but
not think like all these people were Turkish blood, but it was a kind of like an area of influence. I don't know. What do you think?
yeah, you remind me of this one genetic study I once read. I can link it maybe to you, maybe even in the description. Like they analyzed the
Mm-hmm.
genome of the population in the Republic of Turkey, and they
Mm-hmm.
found that most Turks had very little genetic remnants of like Central Asian origin. Instead, Turks were much more similar genetically to all their neighbors, to Greeks, to Armenians, to Kurds, to Arabs. Well, less Arabs,
Mm-hmm.
but like
Mm-hmm.
generally this like Eastern Mediterranean.
Yeah, yeah.
And what is was more amazing, they actually found a genetic marker from like the late Bronze Age, which the authors of
Uh-huh.
this paper hypothesized might come from the Hittites.
Ah.
So instead of like this classic view of like the like an invader comes and like fucks all the women in the like, country and like imprints its own genetics onto everyone, it was the other way around. The invaders, like the Seljuks, the Oghuz or whatever, came here and the country made them their own.
Ah. I mean, there's also like that's another strange thing about history in this part of the world. Even though we think that the Turks came over from Central Asia and like conquered this land, there is so much continuity historically, like from Hittites onto the basically Anatolian Hellenistic client states
Yeah.
onwards
Don't
to
forget the
Rome.
Lydians who were in between that. The Lycians and
Yeah, I
Lydians
mean,
and all these like people who were related to the Hittites.
yeah, Pisidians and Phrygians and all those. So there's a like, and you look at some of the like monuments from the Hittite era, and they read exactly like uh, a political party's news bulletin from the present days. Like I built this much roads, I filled the granaries. So the like the cults of the ruler, the mechanisms of power, and just overall folk culture, they're extremely consistent. I'm certainly this is also the case with Byzantium as well. So there's a kind of quantum status. Like in one hand, there's this historic continuity. On the other hand, there's this kind of great Central Asian radiation and like who came first. In fact, I think some of the more, let us say, irredentist versions of Turkish nationalism claim a Turkish reconquest of Anatolia. They believe that the earliest Turks, 10,000 years ago or something, first came over and created Sumeria and then the Hittites. And then these people somehow forgot who they were. And then when the Seljuks came again, they finally remembered. Now, you be the judge of that.
Well, I mean, the Hittite language is an Indo-European one, which is very well supported by fact. Like they literally, like for example, they literally still use words like water to describe water. Like that's how you can see the relationship to like most European languages. So yeah, it's very unlikely that the Hittites were related to Turkic people as we define them.
I think the cutting edge of that hypothesis is focusing more on Sumerians. There's a very well respected old lady. She's like a chief Sumerologist, and like even though her research is extensive and obviously very meticulous, she sometimes makes these connections like how Sumerian could be related to. I mean, there's a historian, Ella. There's for every civilization in the world, there's one historian who's doing the Turkic link in Turkey today. There's books called the Etruscans were Turks. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? I think it all comes down to geography. I mean, Central Asia is this like heart-like reservoir that pumps out wave after wave of rulers and conquerors, and every 500 years,
Yeah.
it's from this.
And we always have
So
to
it
be
started out as
careful.
Halloween.
Yeah, right.
Sorry.
Yeah, we have to be careful with these discussions always because well, it's you know what? Let's go back to the original topic because this is a bit too much now for me to explain.
All right. Well, this is the best thing about the CMTK talk hour, that now it's a quantum show. It starts out as Halloween, then it becomes a pan-Turkist history show. So where else do you get that? It's almost been an hour, by the way. So maybe I talk about one more film, you talk about one more film, and let's call the night. How about that?
Sounds good.
Okay, so I'm just gonna like finish off with my favorite recent, let's say favorite 80s horror film ever. And this is Halloween 3. Not Halloween 1, not Halloween 2. By the way, like I'm just describing it for posterity, but Halloween is the series with the masked killer Michael Myers and kind of launched the whole genre again. And it's kind of like the cultural ancestor of the Friday the 13th series, the Scream series, like the OG the OG masked stabbing killer movie. Okay. Now the first film is the one with what's her name? Jamie Lee Curtis. Murderer comes up, he's somehow immortal. Second film is like Murderer returns, some more shenanigans ensue. Third film is nothing similar. It's about this evil company who's using magic bits from the monoliths of Stonehenge and placing them in Halloween masks together with this radio chip in a nefarious bid to rule the world. And when Halloween really comes, this one jingle will play, and all the kids wearing these masks implanted with the Stonehenge magical stone formula microchip, they will turn literally into piles of snakes and toads, basically. That's the entire premise of the film. And it's directed by the original director, John Carpenter. And it's just a wild, wild ride. And it's, I mean, my favorite film in the Halloween franchise because it's obvious that Now, if you look at the Halloween franchise, there's like 16 films, all with this Mike Myers, the killer, Mike Myers, Mike Myers, Mike Myers, Mike Myers, resurrected, dead, undying, genetic experiments on Mike Myers. But I think John Carpenter wanted this kind of like shifting series,
Like he wanted
each
it
with
to
a
be
wild story.
an anthology series where like Halloween is the protagonist, like the holiday, and
Yeah,
not this Mike Myers guy. Who, by the way, like do you know the origin of Mike Myers' mask?
I think it was a Star Trek Captain
Yeah,
Kirk
it's a
mask,
William
wasn't it?
Shatner mask.
They just dipped it in bleach or something, or I don't know.
Exactly.
Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite Halloween film, or like, are you a fan of that series at all?
I haven't watched it much, to be honest. Like I know like the basic plots of each movie and how it gets like really weird after like part five, where they say like Mike Myers is like the incarnation of some old Celtic god that has to murder his whole family every Halloween to appease their gods. And
Going back to the Golden Bow again, but it's a really nice. I have to credit my wife for it because I would never have watched it on my own if it hadn't been for her. But she's like, there's director Joe Carpenter. Let's watch. Unbelievable series. Like even the cheesy bad ones. The only ones I never watched are these Rob Zombie Halloween films, which Rob Zombie wrote and directed. And maybe they're good too, but just never did the trick for me.
yeah,
So there.
I haven't heard good things about those remakes either. So I think Rob Zombie can do good movies. Have you watched The Devil's Rejects?
No, no, no.
It's like it's basically a movie about three psychopathic mass murderers, but they're like the heroes of the story.
So who are they fighting against?
Like a police officer that wants to capture them. And like in the end, the police officer becomes worse than them because he starts torturing them.
The sort of crooked cop, true evil story.
Exactly.
But I have no. I think Rob Zombie's songs are, for some reason, the song he made for The Matrix, "Into the Bridges and then na 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 Dracula," never leaves my mind. But
Was it in the first Matrix?
yeah, this song was in the soundtrack. I don't think it played in the movie, but
Ah,
for
okay.
some reason, it was in the soundtrack album. It
That's
was a
like
whole other age back then, of course.
yeah.
You had soundtrack albums. You bought discs, played them. Sometimes they had like completely unrelated songs, but I think they were like part of the movie universe that kind of you got into if you were like a big fan enough.
Yeah.
And let's have one last movie from you.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. It's another John Carpenter movie. Maybe you can call this the John Carpenter cast. Let,
Yes, yes, the
let's talk
pan
about The
Turkist.
Thing,
Oh,
1982.
now you hit the nail on the head. Now that's a great film. I mean, it's funny because when it first came out, people hated it for some reason, and it almost like they almost turned Joe Carpenter away from movies altogether. It had such negative reviews. People thought it was so bleak, but it's not. I don't know. For some reason, they didn't like it.
Yeah, I also
But
don't get that.
I mean, it's. I think the closest we can get to uh, an H.P. Lovecraft film. I guess a few of those have been made, but none of them are good
Yeah.
enough.
Didn't
In fact,
Guillermo del Toro wanted to make a movie about Mountains of Madness, but
yeah, I
then
think
I think he had what?
every 5 years, he's making Mountains of Madness.
Yeah,
I mean, this
yeah, like and he had
regularly
to
comes up in the news.
yeah, and he had to cancel it. The last time because Ridley Scott made Prometheus, which is kind of the same plot according to Del Toro.
Ah,
Yeah,
well, I would have loved to see Del Toro's version. I think an unspoken factor there is the fact that the legal ownership of Lovecraft's works is extremely complicated. And I mentioned this before in other podcasts, but basically, now you can print Lovecraft stories and sell them. No one's going to sue you about them. But I guess there's a like basically cat's cradle of tangled copyright ownerships there. And if you make something as big as a multi-million-dollar movie, then some cat can come out of that mess and claim rights for it. So I think that's a secret reason why they're not touching it also. But if you're out of money, you and I can just start printing Lovecraft stories or selling Lovecraft audiobooks right now. And
imagine if you made like little edits into those versions, like Mountains of Madness, but I know it's 10% gayer or some joke like that.
The CMTK edition. I mean, it's true. You can make your own Dojin edition of all those. No one's gonna stop you. But it's just gonna be in really bad taste. But I mean, I would love to extend that. I mean,
how I learned to love Cthulhu
for another 1,000 pages. Like my version of Mountains of Madness would start. They go to these expeditions, then they discover the lost city. Then it's another 5 volumes, like the history of the Roman Empire, just the history of the Elder Things and the monsters they fought and the creatures they made. At the end, they learn all of these facts and go home, and everybody's happy.
You know what would be cool? Like in the novel, there's like this hint that there's like this group of elder things that have woken up and are also trying to like reorient themselves. Like, where the fuck are we? Who are these ape things that have just dug us out? They like go on like their own adventure with like a sled they stole. And wouldn't it be fun to like write a story about the whole ordeal, but from their perspective?
I think it would be a horror film from their perspective too.
Yeah, right. Because they like they wake up and they're like being cut open by human scientists.
And not just apes, but I think the entire clade of backboned animals are like kind of an afterthought, like these alien abominations, because they were like Archean age, like 1 billion years ago.
Yeah, but their civilization was still big around the time of the dinosaurs, because there's like like murals of how they use dinosaurs as draft animals, basically.
They used pterosaurs as sky cranes. Apparently, exactly. I remember that bit. They had a kind of so maybe all those like Hatzegopteryx and Aramburgaronia and Quetzalcoatlus, they're like basically skyhook helicopters for the elder things. I remember in the book there's a scene they describe how they use the giant pterosaurs to lift stones. That's apparently how the cities were built.
Yeah, and like Lovecraft says, this must have been a species that has yet to be found in the fossil record, which is kind of prescient when you think about it, because like as dark pterosaurs were not yet known at that time.
And they kind of do look like cranes, don't they? Like the machines, not the birds. They do look like construction cranes with the straight neck and all that. Oh well.
Well, let's go back to the thing.
Yeah, the film. So tell us about it, TK.
Oh shit! Now I have to do the story time. Yeah, basically it's about this Antarctic research station where they find something in the ice that they. The movie begins differently, right? Yeah, it starts with this Antarctic research station, and like one day they see like this big helicopter that's coming from like a Swedish or Norwegian station, like chasing a wolf a husky. Sorry.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm really bad in these retellings. Like they're chasing this husky, and these Norwegians land there, and the Americans don't understand them. Why are they like hunting this poor dog? And there's like an altercation, and the 2 Norwegians are killed, and the husky is just like adopted by the Americans, and while the Americans try to figure out what the hell just happened, the dog explodes and kills all the other huskies in the compound and like absorbs them, because it is really an alien monster that imitated the dog.
Oh, And then the rest of the story is like a whodunit mystery, like which one of us is the alien, and they run all these tests, and then
Exactly, because the alien can like infect anyone and just take over their body cell by cell to, I think, the
Mhm.
point where you yourself won't know if you have actually been infected.
True. I think it's, by the way, it's we talked about Lovecraft, but actually the origin book for this story was something called Who Goes There by, I don't remember the author's name, but it was like a legit book. I think it was I don't remember the name of the author, but the book was called Who Goes There. And apparently in that book it is hinted that the alien operates in a level smaller than cells. So it can imitate maybe matter itself. Maybe it's like paramatter or something. I don't know. So
Yeah,
so there's a
sorry to interject. The author was John W. Campbell Jr.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
And of course, this movie is actually a remake of another movie based on this novel that was like made in the 1950s. And of course, back then they loved the analogy of this movie. You know, like you don't know who can be the enemy because that was like their
Communism.
analogy for communism. You don't know who
Yep.
secretly is a communist.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think maybe there's a kind of there's a sense of poetry in that the movie was made in the 1980s, which was the final and the most intense period of the Cold War. But there was no such thing as the McCarthy scares or like the communist manhunts in those years. So, anyways, it's getting late. It's my head misfiring. But so there, I think like we did a nice. We covered a lot of ground. Remarkably little about horror films, but a lot more about a lot of other interesting stuff.
It's like the curse of
And
this podcast. The topic that we always want to talk about is the one that we'll talk the least about.
yeah, but I think it's a curse is also a blessing because otherwise it's just boring. Introduce a little chaos and
Yeah. Midnight Mass, starring Jeff Depp, Mehmet Kozemen.
I was actually imitating the Joker from The Dark Knight.
Oh yeah, you're right.
He was saying, "Did he
Have
say
you
introduce
watched
a little?"
the new one?
Oh no, no, I haven't. I want. You mean the one with Joaquin Phoenix?
Exactly.
Oh, I watched that one. That one wasn't so bad. I think now for 2 or 3 more years they're gonna forget about that film. But I think like in 5 to 10 years it's gonna have a resurgence and it's gonna be the best film ever that anybody ever watched. But I think films have this weird, like they dive deep. They're like beaked whales. They dive deep, they disappear, and then they surface again. I
Yeah.
think Avatar was a bit like that too. Like for 10 years nobody gave a damn about it, but then last month I watched it again in the theaters. I was fucking crying. I literally like cried 2 or 3 times during the movie. I to this day I will go out and say it's like one of the best films ever made. Like,
I wouldn't
why
go
did
that far, but it was a very good movie, and I don't understand the hate that it gets. Many people say it's overrated, but I don't see enough people talk positively about it to call it overrated. More like it was overhyped. I think that's the better statement.
I think maybe when it first came out, a lot of hype was centered around the whole 3D display experience,
Yeah, that's true.
which I
That
think is like
was
a
revolutionary back then.
gimmick.
Not John Carpenter. Um, well, what James Cameron? That's the name. Yeah,
James
like
Cameron.
he was the first one to actually make a good 3D movie because before that it was really always just a cheap gimmick that people grew tired of.
And after that, I think like for 5 years, every major film was for some unknown reason in 3D.
Yeah,
There's no getting away from that shit, but it was just,
which was really
it
shit
gave
for me
me
because
headaches.
yeah, little because like my right eye is underdeveloped compared to the left eye, so I actually have like problem with binocular vision. And so
Oh,
these 3D glasses don't actually really work on me. So when I have to watch a 3D movie with these shitty glasses on, I actually get like a very, very intense headache. So I
and
prefer
towards
watching
the
them in 2D.
and towards the end of that trend, they filmed everything is in fucking 60 frames per second,
Oh
and
yeah.
it gave me headaches. I mean, you are not alone. I mean, even if you got like quote unquote better eyes, the damn thing hurt you. But to his credit, Cameron kind of like used the 3D immersion experience as a filmic metaphor for being inside the avatar and waking up in the second body. And, that was like really nicely worked into the whole film plot,
That's
basically.
something I never thought about. That's an interesting perspective.
I think I felt that from the moment the movie starts, like Sam Worthington wakes up, the first thing we see is a droplet floating in zero G from his perspective. And then we wake up to his world. We wake up as the avatar. He spends the whole time like propped up against something that's kind of like a 3D movie glass. So behind the screen in the coffin like telepathy machine, whatever. We spend the whole thing with the glasses. I think they like nice job there. So, anyways, that's it. That's it from me. We kind of recorded this podcast. Normally, we plan to record earlier during the day, but this evening I had some free time and so did TK. So we said, let's go. But right now, I'm kind of uh, it's getting sleepy time in Teletubby land for me.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts you want to add?
Yeah, well, I am also mostly finished with what I want to say. Like, I think next episode could be interesting if we talk again about fringe history like that. Because
Oh,
like some
yes,
things
yes.
that I wanted to mention but left out is like, for example, like what you talked about with this similarity in like the ceramics made by Native Americans and Turkic people. Like comparisons like that led to things like Mu, the lost continent.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
which I think even Atatürk believed in once.
I think Atatürk, he had a theory about a master language, the Sun language, and then he happened to read the books by this kind of British pseudoscientist who wrote about Mu. And then in his library, Atatürk annotated all of his books. So, like, basically, like he was a late 19th century kind of guy. He read and took notes, very precise about that. So, in his library, he had a copy of the Mu book by this British guy, and he annotated that. And I think that was kind of blown out of proportion because there's a whole mystique around Atatürk that people like to think that he was like a national treasure kind of guy. Like he knew a lot more than we do today. Like that's what people want to believe. And so I think this whole mood thing was kind of blown out of proportion, and everybody likes a little bit of mystery in their news. So they kind of combined Atatürk's hypothesis of this solar language somehow together with the Mu hypothesis, and I don't know. I don't know. I mean, as a pragmatic leader, Atatürk national myth to organize Turkey around
Sorry,
after
there
the
was a
fall of the
bit of
Ottoman
a
Empire.
hiccup.
Ooh, where
Yeah,
did you lose me?
you were just the beginning of the sentence.
Okay, so like as a really pragmatic leader, Atatürk also looked for a new identity to organize the country around because the Ottoman Empire had just collapsed and the whole multinational Ottoman system just didn't cut it anymore. And so maybe that whole language thing was one of the things he researched. And then The Moo book was just one of the books which he happened to read. But I don't think Atatürk was going out in like history seminars and trying to teach people about Moo or something like that. It was just one of the big books which he had happened to read. That's how I look at it. I don't know.
But yeah,
But of
that's
course,
all that stuff will be great for the next episode, don't you think?
of course, we will start talking about that, but we will slip into Allosaur evolution or the mystery of cryptic squid or something, you know.
Yeah.
It's our
Or what
cursed.
I did in Texas last week.
Were you in Texas?
No. Or
Ah,
what if I were? Speculative something. Like not
you
speculative
are.
evolution, just speculative happenings.
But there's a phenomenon like that, a spontaneous human teleportation. Like there are these like cases of like this two old ladies were walking in London or something. They suddenly found themselves transported into Versailles Palace in the time of Louis XVI, and then they came back, and there's all kinds of though
To me, that
not
just sounds
entirely.
like a drunken banter.
Okay, okay, everyone. Thanks for putting up with us. This was the CMTK Halloween horror movie special, which quickly, like Joe Carpenter's The Thing, mutated into an uncontrollable monster.
Oh, I have a great idea for the episode title.
What's it?
It's the CMTK Talk Hour Pumpkin Spice Edition.
Okay, okay, I'll take you up on that. Okay, everyone, this has been the Pumpkin Spice Toxic Mutant Edition. Fuck, when I was in high school, it came back now after decades. Me and a friend wrote a song called Toxic Mutant. I still remember the lyrics. Tıkız
Like
tıkız
Toxic
tıkız tıkız.
Avenger.
I am the toxic mutant. Yeah, the fucking mutant. It was like a Pantera and Slayer all rolled into one. Anyways, this has been the Toxic Mutant. Thanks for putting up with us. And thanks once again for considering to donate to our channels. Once again, you can listen to our show on what was it, TK? Spotify?
Yeah, it should be available on all podcasting platforms that have like an RSS feed. Like we host it through Anchor, so if you go on Anchor, you can just get the RSS link. If you use something like
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Downcast, and otherwise it's like really
mm-hmm.
available on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and Overcast.
All right. So all the links are below, including our Patreon links. If you're feeling generous, we will be very happy. And that was that from me and TK. Thank you all so much.
Goodbye.
Bye.